Corporate performance report, that's at page 21 on the agendas. I'll hand over for the report.
Thank you, Chair. This is the end-of-year corporate performance report for 2017-18. The KPIs are reported quarterly to this committee before going on to Cabinet. So this report will go on to Cabinet in July. The report sets out all the KPIs and performance against target for the whole of last year, identifying some particular highlights but providing additional commentary and explanation and mitigating action where we've failed to hit our performance targets. The report also sets out the indicators that we're proposed to monitor in the current year, so 2018-19, again for the committee to comment on those before Cabinet sign them off next month. I won't say any more in terms of introduction, but very happy to take questions, as I'm sure my Directors Board colleagues will be, and anything that we're not able to answer, obviously we'll take away and come back to the committee separately.
Thank you very much for that. I have a number of questions which I'll kick off on and then we'll open out to the committee as well. And the first one I'll start with is on page 22 at paragraph 3.2, the table of better and worse performing KPIs versus 2016-17. So first of all, I think the point that we always note is that won't include any KPIs that have been removed in the year. Do we have a sense of how many KPIs have been taken out year on year, and what the kind of the performance on those KPIs was prior to us taking them out of the basket?
Yep. So there were 14 that came out. About 60% of those, so similar to the overall position, were on target.
Thank you very much. I think it's worth I will come to sort of some of those things that are off target, but I think it's worth just highlighting first of all some of the targets that we've hit that I think we'll all be very pleased to see. First of all, the proportion of primary schools judged good or better, sitting at 97%. I think this is, we're getting to the end of a very long journey of improving our schools in Thurrock from about 8 years ago when we were, pretty much bottom quartile in terms of performance, and I think to see us move up that scale has been really impressive. I think I'll also mention the number of affordable housing units delivered directly, and to be achieving that target is good. I know that we've all got ambition to deliver a much higher number of affordable housing units, but it's good to see that we are above the ambitions that we've set so far. I think the challenge now is to make those ambitions much tougher in future and to raise our sights in terms of the number of units that we deliver. The other one that I will just ask as a question before we move on to some of those things off target is that when we take street cleanliness, which is on page 24, I see we've now got 3 quarters worth of data on the new methodology. We had much better figures in quarter 2 and 3 at 8.5% and 6.5%, before we had quite a poor performance in the fourth quarter at 14%. Do we know what was driving that kind of differential in performance through the year?
I don't, I'm afraid. I know, obviously, at the committee we've talked about the change in methodology and using Keep Britain Tidy, but I don't know the reason behind that change, particularly in the last quarter. I'd have to come back to you on that separately, I'm afraid.
Thanks very much. So I'll move on then to some of the off-target indicators. First of all, I'll start again with sickness absence days. I think we talk about this indicator pretty much every time that this report comes back to committee. And again, we've outturned at just about 10 days versus a target of 9. I see, looking as well at some of the future targets that have been set, that we've stuck with a target of 9. So I guess in terms of the kind of the difficulty in getting to that level so far, do we think that is still achievable as a target going into next year?
I think we do think it's achievable, and the reason for not changing that is that we do believe we're doing everything that we possibly can, following best practice. We regularly have an in-depth conversation at Directors Board in terms of the action that we're taking, with HR colleagues working really closely on particular cases and with particular services. So we haven't changed the target. We are optimistic and kind of constantly reviewing what we are doing. doing, but very much believe we're doing all that we can, as I say, in line with best practice and what other councils are doing, and a positive direction of travel compared to last year. So it is heading in the right direction, albeit not hitting that target just yet.
Yeah, and would we characterise that target of kind of hitting 9 days then as kind of an optimistic and stretching target that we'll strive towards but don't necessarily think that we'll hit, or are we quite kind of confident of actually that this year we will finally reach that number?
I think for all the reasons I've just set out, I think it is still challenging, but with the positive direction of travel, I think we would be more optimistic of hitting that this year, looking at everything we can possibly do to achieve that within our own directorates, as well as from an HR perspective as well.
Thanks very much. The next point I'll pick up on is the percentage of refuse bins emptied on the correct day at the top of page 26. I think it's obviously disappointing that we've missed that target again. I know obviously that there is work underway to improve that service. I wonder if we could just hear kind of briefly what the kind of the next steps are in terms of further improving that, and if I could build on that a bit, have we looked into any differences in terms of the days that tend to be hit by those issues? I know, sort of as someone that has a lot of residents who have their bins collected later in the week rather than earlier in the cycle, they feel like they're affected by it more than those people that are at the front end of the week. So it'd be interesting to see if we've done any analysis in terms of where we're falling behind on those collections.
Yes, we have some very detailed analysis around the locations and the round, and you're right to say that as you get to the end of the week, obviously the ability to manage issues that have occurred earlier in the week is more challenging, but certainly something that the service are very much aware of and working on. I think also identifying particular causes and particular issues. So one of the things that we've picked up that we're also trying to deal with in terms of messaging is blocked access. So actually the lorry's been unable to collect bins because they're unable to access a particular road and location. So from a communications perspective, we've been working really closely with the service in terms of where there's a specific reason that we're able to tackle some of that. The service have absolutely done a lot of research in terms of both the causes and the reasons for the missed bins, as well as things like the days of the weeks and location, and kind of working through that operationally.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I take the point in terms of the better communications. I've had a resident contact me just in the last week that said they've had their brown bins missed for 3 weeks in a row now, and I think at the very least us being able to explain the reasons for that. I hope it's not just that they are missed because they're missed, but being able to communicate that I think would be very helpful. And obviously, the real thing we need to do is make sure that we kind of crack this for all of the borough and not just those parts that have been collected earlier in the week.
Absolutely, and I think what we have seen is an improvement in quarter four. So albeit overall we didn't hit the end of year target, but the improvement in quarter four hopefully indicates that some of those initiatives and some of those things are working, and obviously we'll be continuing to monitor that in the year ahead.
Thank you. I've got a few more, but I think I'll open it out to the committee to jump in for a couple of questions, and I'll come back.
Just to ask you the other question is we had some really adverse weather this year, and I mean, I live in a little cul-de-sac, and that was affecting getting the lorries down my road this year. Did you believe that affected the scales this year at all? Because it was on and off for quite some time, wasn't it?
It has been an issue, not just for this service, for other service areas as well. But actually, interestingly, in quarter four, we have hit that target on missed bins. So it hasn't had the impact on that service that you might. It will have been a factor, but hasn't had the impact on that service as much as you might have expected it to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. First time using one of these, so. A couple of points, if I may. First one that occurs to me, looking at particularly at the KPIs which have not been met, what I'm quite surprised not to find in here is a route to green. for any of them. There are plenty of reasons, or if one were being less charitable, in certain cases, excuses. But what I don't see in here is if you've missed, what's the action that's going to be taken to hit it within the next quarter or within the next year?
I have to bounce between you.
Go for it.
Just looking at the number of volunteers, it doesn't really give a judge on what those volunteers are doing. Would it be better going forward potentially to look at volunteer hours, because we could have 200 volunteers each doing an hour, or 100 volunteers each doing 10 hours, and you find out the 100 volunteers are actually doing more?
I don't want to jump in. That's a good point. I'm happy to feed that back in terms of the definition that we look at for 18-19, and it might be that we provide that information alongside the number, and certainly feed that back in terms of how we report that and being clearer about the action that will take place in terms of within a specific time scale.
I've got a few that are grouped, all regarding the complaints. It's the worrying direction, especially with the upheld complaints. The responses are there has been improvement, but it's a lot worse. Was there a change, or has there been a dropping of the ball? And I'll get to the other one afterwards. I'll just let you.
Thank you. There's been no significant changes. We know that as you'd expect, the majority of complaints are in frontline services such as housing and environment. That's where the majority of the volume is. The complaints team and the service areas have learning action plans, which I think have been discussed at this committee previously. So there's quite a lot of in-depth work in terms of what's the cause of the complaint. Are they similar themes? What activity can we put in place to change processes, change the way we do things to improve that? So in some ways similar to the sickness, kind of looking in depth at those areas in terms of what we can do. There's been no change in terms of timescales or anything like that, and again certainly discussions at directors board level in terms of the process and what we can do to ensure that we're responding fully and effectively within that time.
Yeah, just before I bring Sean in, I think that's a point that will concern a number of us around the table. I think if we look at the figures there, that's not a small miss, that's quite a large miss that we're talking about. So from a target of 95%, we're hitting only 83% handled in the time limit. So we're obviously somewhere away at the moment in terms of where we need to be. Sean, did you want to come in on that one as well?
Thank you, Chair. This goes for some of the other details, especially for some of the new members, really, as well. So the complaints report, it was just to advise members that this is looked at in a lot more detail in Standards and Audit Committee. So the corporate overview and scrutiny obviously just take the overarching high-level review of everything. So that will be given a much more wider debate with more information and so on at Standards and Audit, in a similar way to some of the way the service-specific issues, maybe around refuse collection and so on, would be looked at in Cleaner Greener and from that aspect. But yeah, certainly complaints will be looked at in either the July or September Standards and Audit Committee. September.
Thanks, Rich. I'm just going to go for another one and then I'll hand back over again. And because the next one I think on my list is one I really do want to ask about, which is the proportion of potholes being repaired within the policy and agreed time frame. And clearly we set a target of 100%. In fact, I think we were told about a year ago that all potholes would be filled in the borough by 2018. So I think it's disappointing to see a fail on this one. I know we've seen some extreme weather issues that have affected that. My question really though is probably a broader one, which is clearly a number of these areas have seen significant extra investment to make sure that we're getting over the line with the targets. Have we seen any or have we performed any analysis on the investment that we've put in some of those service areas to make sure that we're actually seeing the return from that investment?
from the finance function, we haven't gone into it from that point to look at a traditional return on investment, if you like. It's obviously something that within every service, whatever we do, there's continual. It's a bit like the complaints, continual review, continual look to see how it can improve and so on from that aspect. And the numbers, of overall will be being looked at closely from Julie Rogers' team, I'm sure, from that aspect.
Thank you, Sean. And I'll open up to Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, just picking up on that that point. I mean, I know we're obviously looking at overall figures, but one of the concerns I have is that, and if we take potholes as a classic example, this figure gives an idea that there's been a sort of a uniform achievement across the borough. Now, where would I go if I wanted to find out whether that investment has actually been, or whether that activity has actually been fairly equally played out? Certainly my part of the borough, I don't think the pothole fairy has visited for quite a few months, which obviously won't appear in a top-level KPI. But if one wanted to dig further down, where would one go?
I mean, I can certainly take that back to the service in terms of asking that question. As Sean alluded to, other committees would get a more detailed and more in-depth report on things like those issues, but we can certainly take away the specific question in terms of getting you some more detail on that.
Thanks very much, Councillor Daffin.
I know we don't usually get as bad weather as it was in Q4, but could we look at being more preemptive by potentially looking at repairing potholes that aren't quite as... Are they officially a pothole because it's not quite that deep in Q3? Because then when you can't go out in Q4, you then haven't got that problem, and potentially even looking across the borough and repairing it when before it's I think it's 30 millimetres, so repair it at 25 millimetres, and then you potentially on 100% anyway, because you're repairing everything when it hits 25 rather than 30. Just be more preemptive with it rather than having a snowy quarter and everything goes wrong.
We'll certainly take that back as a suggestion.
Thanks very much. So the last point I'll raise on this then is the proportion of household waste reused, recycled or composted. And I think, again, this is one of those areas where we've had a few conversations at this committee over that indicator in recent years. And I think, I think there's a lot of work that we need to do to hit the target. I think the disappointing element here is that we seem to have a negative direction of travel year on year in terms of our performance. I wonder, is the team going to go away and have a look again at some of the options that we've got in terms of how we could improve that figure? Because I know that we've had suggestions from this committee in the past on things like whether some sort of shared incentive scheme for recycling could be effective, and it'd be nice to see that some of those kind of ideas in terms of how we might go forward and pick up some alternative ways of doing things could be taken on board.
Yes, absolutely. The team have been doing a lot of work on that. There's a detailed paper that's going to Cleaner, Greener, Safer Overview and Scrutiny Committee in July that will feed back on the position and the action and activities that are taking place. Certainly, one of the big pieces of research that the team have done is around recycling in flats, which is obviously, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, more challenging. Again, what other councils have seen success in and other initiatives, as well as some of the communication messages and how we target some of that. But yeah, there's been a lot of work, but it will be going back in detail to the July Cleaner Greener meeting.
Thanks very much. There are also a number of other key indicators presented at paragraph 3.6, and I think the one interesting one that I will pull out is the average weekly household earnings for Thurrock residents, which I'm reading as moving from £576 in the previous outturn to £556 this time, which I think is a drop of around 3%. Certainly when inflation is moving costs upwards, that's potentially kind of quite a big hit in terms of the buying power for Thurrock residents. Do we have any kind of understanding of what's driving that trend? Is it, for example, a change in mix of the types of jobs available in Thurrock? I mean, how much kind of work are we doing to understand what's driving that?
Thank you, and good evening. I think we can do a bit more work than we've done. I think you've touched on probably the main reason is the nature of the jobs that are being created in the borough. So, for example, Amazon started up over the last 12 months, and the nature of the work there, I think, is, as we know, shift work, which, while important jobs, aren't necessarily paying the higher amounts that we are seeking. And I think that the challenge that we've got is to work with business to create a more diversified economy that is able to generate jobs of higher value than perhaps that we've been accustomed to within the sectors that we have, important as they are to the Thurrock economy. So I think it is a combination of the nature of the sectors we've got, but also some of the businesses that have opened up over the last 12 months.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on the item? Councillor Duffin?
Just on the number of incidents of fly tipping reported, seems to have seen a massive reduction. Yet I hear about fly tipping more and more than I ever have before. I was just wondering what caused that change.
I don't know specifically. Is literally the numbers that have been reported through to us. So in terms of what's been reported, there has been a reduction, as you say, significantly overall. We've certainly been promoting ways in which people can get rid of their rubbish, making sure they use kind of licensed carriers, etc. So there's been quite a lot of work around that. Can't say whether that's had an impact or not, but they are. That's why we don't set a performance target against it. But yeah, there's been a reduction overall.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, I suppose really to pick up on Councillor Duffin's comment, the problem with a reported figure is it can mean one of two things. Just as easily mean that people have given up reporting it if they don't think anything is being done. Do we have anything anywhere that's telling us how many fly tipping incidents have been actually dealt with?
Yeah, the service will have that information, where it's our responsibility to obviously to deal with it, and obviously not all it would be, but yes.
Thanks very much. If there's no one else coming on that point, then we'll move to Appendix 1 and the new KPI, or the 2018-19 Corporate Performance Framework. Again, I think what's always helpful is to understand if there's any KPIs that have been removed from that list and what they might have been.
One I prepared earlier. Happy to circulate this. There were 6 indicators that were removed. Yeah, is that right, Sean? Sorry, thank you. There were 6 indicators that were removed. Some of those reflect kind of sort of one-off type initiatives that we monitored for the year, and other changes that where progress has been so significant that actually we would continue to monitor them at a service level, but not necessarily at a corporate KPI level.
Thanks very much for that. And just looking at the list that Sean circulated, I know there are a few removals there that will be quite welcome. For example, the spend on capital programme, which I think always is confusing for members in terms of those sort of multi-year projects that haven't been spent through. Does anyone wish to comment on those items that have been removed? No. Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to the rest of Appendix 1. I think one question, first of all, is that if we look at the proportion of primary schools judged good or better, we're setting again a target at 94%, whereas we achieved 97% last year. I wonder, is it time to be a little bit more ambitious on that and push it to 100%?
Yes, we've got a very active Ofsted framework with regular inspections. There's always a risk, but our schools have been doing remarkably well over the years, as you've quite rightly highlighted, Chair. And I think 100% would be a stretch for us. Very few places achieve that. But I think we'd be looking to see if we could get more schools that were outstanding. So moving from good through to outstanding, I think, would be one of the issues that we're particularly looking at with our heads colleagues.
Thank you. I also noticed that at the moment our targets for street cleanliness on litter and graffiti are to be confirmed at the moment. I just wonder what we're waiting for in terms of those targets.
That's an excellent question, Chair, and I'll take that away.
Councillor Duffin?
Can I just ask why potholes has been dropped to 2%, and can that be changed back to 100%? Because we're promised 100% by the administration, so I expect it to be delivered.
Do any other members have any things that they wish to comment on? I'll just note finally that although it's not, I guess, in our core set of responsibilities, we don't really talk much about crime or the fear of crime in Thurrock in terms of our KPIs. Clearly for us as an authority that's something that's becoming more of a concern year on year, and I think in terms of reflecting the increased emphasis that we're placing on that, it would be useful to understand the potential ways that we could more objectively understand whether the council is playing its part in contributing to solving some of those issues that we see. Councillor Fletcher.
Sorry, just climbing on the back of that again. I think already made the point, but for me, setting a KPI of whether it's fly tipping or abandoned vehicles reported, it's not the council's responsibility how many of these incidents are reported, it's the council's responsibility how many of them are dealt with. For me, that's the wrong indicator in both cases. Because you can basically improve that one by getting around people and encouraging them not to report anything.
Could I add to that? Could we potentially get a KPI regarding how quickly fly tipping's dealt with? Because we regularly hear cases that are left, and I think that would be a good KPI to have.
We're interested more in the supply than the demand.
Thanks very much. If there aren't any other comments, then the recommendations are at page 21, and it's that we note and comment on the performance for 2017-18 and the indicators for 2018-19. I think we've both commented on and noted all of those items in front of us. So thank you very much. We'll move on.